It wasn't a fall. I'll repeat that as many times as necessary to get them to sign off on my medical leave, but I'm not going to lie about how I broke 3 ribs in my collarbone. I was tracking an illegal camper, one Arthur Vance. I found his abandoned camp on the North Ridge, mile 8. The food was untouched, but his gear had been scattered with unnecessary violence. There were no tooth marks on the cans, just metal crushed by brute pressure. At 4:40 p.m., the temperature dropped sharply. The forest settled into that absolute silence that raises the hair on your neck. No birds, no wind in the canopy. Then came the smell. Stale musk, old sweat, and something metallic like dried blood. I turned to head back toward the main trail, and that's when it happened. There was no warning. It came out of the brush to my right. I didn't see it run. I only felt the displacement of air a second before impact. It was like being hit by a vehicle at low speed. I was thrown 3 meters backward, my back slamming into the trunk of a red cedar. The air left my lungs instantly. Before I could hit the ground or reach my weapon, a hand, or whatever that limb was, pinned me against the bark. It wasn't a bear's paw. I felt the pressure of 5 points of grip on my tactical vest, closing with hydraulic force. The entity was there, standing on 2 legs, blocking out all the light. I didn't see its face. It was backlit and far too close, but I felt the heat radiating from its body. It was an industrial furnace wrapped in coarse, wire-hard hair. I heard my own ribs crack. The pain was blinding. It could have torn my head off. It had the leverage, the mass, the strength. But it didn't. It leaned in and released a hot breath across my neck, a deep, vibrating growl that resonated inside my own rib cage. It wasn't hunger. It was authority. It was telling me I had crossed a line. Then, suddenly, the pressure was gone. I dropped to my knees, coughing, gasping desperately for air. When I managed to look up with my flashlight, I only saw the movement of high branches about 20 meters away, closing behind it. It moved in silence, despite weighing well over 200 kilos. It took me 4 hours to drag myself to the road. In the report, I wrote that I was attacked by a rutting elk. It's the only explanation they'll accept for blunt chest trauma without bite marks. But elk don't have hands, and they don't spare your life to teach you a lesson. That area isn't ours. We're only allowed in until they decide we're no longer welcome. I've been bow hunting elk on the Olympic Peninsula for 20 years. I know the difference between the sound of a squirrel and a black bear. What happened that afternoon isn't in any tracking manual. I was secured in my tree stand about 5 meters off the ground on an old Douglas fir. Visibility was fading. I was about to climb down and head back to the truck when what we call the Oz effect occurred. The forest went silent. The jays, the squirrels, even the wind, all of it stopped at once. Then I heard the footsteps. They came from my blind side, behind the tree. Slow, deliberate, heavy. It wasn't the rhythmic gait of a quadruped. It was bipedal. Something was walking on 2 feet, carefully distributing immense weight to avoid making excessive noise, but the dry branches on the ground still gave way under the pressure. I drew my bow, assuming it was another hunter encroaching on my area, ready to shout at him. But the smell stopped me. A rising draft of air carried an acrid stench, like damp clothes left to rot in a basement, mixed with concentrated urine. The presence stopped directly beneath my platform. I froze, holding my breath. My boots were 5 meters up. From the acoustics, the source of the breathing I heard, a deep, wet, nasal sound, wasn't coming from ground level. It was coming from about 2 meters up. Whatever was down there was tall enough that its head was dangerously close to the base of my stand. I felt a vibration through the trunk of the tree. It didn't strike it, it pushed it. A single, firm, controlled shove that made a 70-year-old fir sway and rattled my metal seat. It wasn't an attack, it was a test. It was measuring my stability. Then I heard a guttural sound, a click made with tongue and palate, almost electronic, very soft. It stayed there below me for 10 endless minutes. I had a carbon fiber arrow with a broadhead ready, but primal fear paralyzed me. I knew that if I leaned out to take a shot, I'd be exposing my torso within its reach. Eventually, the footsteps moved off into the thick timber, snapping branches at chest height without crouching. I didn't climb down until the sun came up the next morning. I urinated in my own pants because I didn't dare move. I left my gear there, the compound bow, the pack, the rangefinder. I've never returned to that management unit. I've hunted predators my entire life, but that night, I understood that in those woods, we are the prey. We found Corin Reeve at 2:15 a.m., curled up beneath a rock overhang in the Ironwood Ravine. He wasn't injured, but he was catatonic. He still had his backpack on and a hunting knife clenched in his hand, his knuckles white from gripping it too hard. When my second-in-command, Harlan, approached to check his vitals, Reeve didn't say thank you or ask about his family. He stared at us with wide, unfocused eyes and whispered, "It stopped moving when you turned the lights on." We didn't understand what he meant until we began the extraction. Protocol requires constant noise to scare off bears. We shouted, snapped branches, talked over the radio, but about 20 minutes into the hike, we noticed the forest wasn't responding. There were no normal echoes. The atmosphere felt dense, heavy, like the air before an electrical storm. At 2:40 a.m., Harlan, who was bringing up the rear, called for a full stop. "Someone is walking with us," he said over the intercom. We switched off our flashlights and used thermal night vision. Nothing, just cold trees. But the smell was there, a sharp stench like ammonia and dirty hair. We resumed moving. 5 minutes later, a pine cone struck Harlan's helmet. It didn't fall from a tree, it was thrown horizontally with enough force to make his ears ring. When we turned, we'd heard a low growl, a deep chest vibration I felt through the soles of my boots. We weren't being hunted, we were being guided. Every time we tried to veer toward the eastern trail, we heard violent cracking sounds, thick branches breaking in that direction, forcing us to correct our course south, away from the dense zone. The creature was denying us access to that part of the forest. In a clearing, under the moonlight, I saw the silhouette. It stood motionless between two cedars, about 30 meters away. It wasn't a bear standing upright. The proportion of the shoulders to the head was immense, triangular. There was no visible neck. It stayed there, watching us pass, completely still, blending with the vertical shadows of the trunks. I estimate it stood no less than 2 meters 40. When we finally crossed the river line and reached the vehicles, we heard one last sound from the darkness. 3 sharp strikes of wood against wood, rhythmic and loud. A closing warning. I recommend suspending nighttime searches in the Ironwood sector. We are not equipped to deal with something that knows the terrain better than we do. Reeve was lucky. Whatever lives there only wanted us gone. I have a wooden cabin on the north boundary. I use it for fence maintenance. There's no electricity, only propane lamps. I know the local wildlife. I've had bears on the porch and cougars on the roof. I know how they sound. At 1:15 a.m., something climbed the 3 steps to the porch. The wood is old and it creaks, but this was different. It wasn't the shuffling weight of a bear or the light trot of a predator. It was 2 heavy impacts, evenly spaced. Whatever it was distributing its weight on 2 feet. The entire structure of the cabin groaned under the load. I shut off the lamp immediately. I sat in the dark, my .30-06 rifle across my knees on the cot. The thing walked across the porch decking and stopped in front of the only window, which was covered by a thick fabric curtain. It didn't try to open the door or turn the knob. That kind of intelligence is a myth. It did what a curious animal would do: investigate the smell and the heat. I heard breathing right against the wallboards. It was wet, congested, as if there were fluid in its lungs or an unusually wide nasal passage. Then something blocked what little moonlight was leaking through the edges of the curtain. A massive shadow filled the entire frame. For a few seconds, the creature pressed its face or chest against the glass. The pane creaked slightly under the pressure. Then the moonlight shifted, and I could see a strip of detail through a gap where the curtain didn't quite close. I didn't see a monster. I saw dark skin, like old leather, covered with sparse, coarse hair, a dirty brown color, full of pine needles and grime. It wasn't uniform fur like a teddy bear's. It was matted and greasy. I could see part of a shoulder, dense muscle, trembling slightly with each breath. What struck me most was the smell that seeped through the seams of the old window. It wasn't just a bad odor. It smelled of stale urine and animal glands, powerful and acrid. The creature tapped the glass with its knuckles, an awkward gesture, testing the resistance. It wasn't an aggressive strike, more exploratory. When it realized the glass was solid and wouldn't give, it let out a frustrated huff, a deep, vibrating sound I felt in my stomach, and lost interest. It turned away. I heard its weight shift, the porch beams creaking again, and it went down the steps heavily into the snow. I waited until dawn to go outside. On the exterior glass, there was a smear of facial grease at a height of 2 meters and 10 centimeters. There was frozen condensation from its breath. On the ground, the snow was churned up with no clear tracks, but the porch railing was splintered, as if something very wide had brushed past without properly judging its own size. I'm not reporting it to local police because there was no theft or attack, but I've boarded up the windows with plywood. Whatever was there was not human.